Greetings everyone, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, here to bring you another episode review from Season 6 of The Loud House. Today's episode is titled, The Hurt Lockers. First we'll discuss the plot, and then my thoughts and critiques with my final score. So, let's get right into it. In this episode, a sinkhole opens up in the middle school, and because some of the lockers are inaccessible, Lincoln and pals convince Principal Ramirez to let them share alternative lockers among themselves for the time being. However, the pairings of Lincoln and Clyde, Zach and Rusty, and Liam and Stella start becoming a pain when each of them starts experiencing a problem with the locker they're sharing with their friend. They get reassigned with new locker buddies, and once again they each have a terrible time as some ensuing chaos causes them to reopen the newly repaired sinkhole. In the end, after overhearing their depressing conversation, Meryl allows the kids to temporarily use her locker, and they all manage to make this new arrangement work without any issues. Minus the one regarding Zach's security laser, but I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. Well, that concludes the plot of the episode, so now we come to my thoughts and critiques. If there's one thing I don't like about TV shows and movies, it would be instances where characters are not only blamed for something that's not even their fault, but those same characters who get blamed actually convince themselves it really was their fault. That's what happens to Lincoln and pals in this episode, and it's actually some very undeserved shame they put themselves through. It all started when Lincoln suggested to Principal Ramirez that he and his friends should temporarily share alternative lockers while the sinkhole where their usual lockers were located was being repaired. Everything was fine in the beginning with everyone getting along, and that's when I knew something bad was going to happen. Eventually, the kids were getting inconvenienced in one way or another because of what their friend was doing with their locker. For example, Liam and Stella's locker started getting filled up with hay, and the egg collector for Stella's science project got overloaded and went on the fritz. Meanwhile, Clyde was frantically trying to get his homework out of the locker he was sharing with Lincoln, made a mess in the process, and had to chase his friend's dog just to get it back. Why Lincoln would bring Charles to school and hide him in his magic hat, I'll never understand. Perhaps the biggest offender in this collection of inconveniences came in the form of Rusty and Zach's locker. While I give Zach some props for implementing a state-of-the-art security system, how it's used in the episode is actually pretty stupid and inconsistent. For starters, why would Zach install a security system that only responds to him and not include Rusty? I thought they were best friends, as we saw in the episode How the Best Was Won. So what was Zach's reasoning for excluding his bestie when setting up these security measures? If they both had to share the same locker, shouldn't Rusty have been allowed to open it if Zach wasn't around? In fact, there was a scene where the locker was already open with Rusty standing in front of a mirror brushing his hair, and Zach didn't show up until a little bit later. How exactly did Rusty manage to open the locker if the security system could only recognize Zach's voice and fingerprints? A later scene depicted Rusty trying to open the same locker, but the security system didn't recognize him, and he got blasted in the face by a laser. Now do you see how stupidly inconsistent this whole security thing is? But yeah, everyone was starting to have a terrible time with their new locker arrangement, and they wanted to be reassigned to different ones. Unfortunately, after drawing some numbers, the new lockers they were assigned to were even worse than what they had before. Lincoln had to share with Chandler, of all people. Zach had to share with Lynn, again, of all people. Stella was sharing with Chef Pat, who apparently has a locker for storing excess meat. Rusty was sharing with Crikey the kangaroo mascot from the episode Cheer Pressure. Not sure why a mascot needs a locker in the first place. Liam was sharing with Jenna, who was also a prominent character from Cheer Pressure. And Clyde was sharing with some kid named Andrew, who somehow decided to dress up in a cat onesie and actually behave as a cat. I get how this was supposed to be a subtle reference to the episode Frame on You, but seriously, what this Andrew guy was doing in the episode just made me cringe. Obviously, Lincoln and pals were not having a good time. They were having a miserable time being surrounded by people they really couldn't tolerate, and understandably so. And in some cases, it was literally painful for them. I felt their pain because this new arrangement was pretty bad to look at. But you know, I will say despite how super annoying Liam's situation was, his interaction with the cheerleaders was kinda hilarious and slightly adorable. Jenna and the other girls were putting on cheer routines for everything Liam was doing, and that got me thinking about this one episode of Zoe 101. It was the People Auction episode where Logan had Zoe and her friends be his personal cheerleaders and making them cheer for everything he did. Anyway, Lincoln and pals tried to make their new locker arrangement work the best they could, but thanks to a freak chain reaction they ended up making a giant mess, and this resulted in the newly repaired sinkhole reopening. Now we come to the more defined negatives of the episode, which take on two forms of what appeared to be instances of low-key victim blaming. I'm not sure if I'm the only one seeing it from this angle, but going based off the tone in her voice, it sounded as if Principal Ramirez was actually blaming Lincoln and his friends for damaging the newly repaired sinkhole. Now I understand why she'd think that. They were lying in the area where the repairs were made, and they did fall through the hole, but how they got there was through no fault of their own. It was Lynn who who launched a hockey puck towards a locker, caused a bunch of balls to fall out, and that's what sent Lincoln, Rusty, and Zach rolling down the hallway. This caused Stella to get caught up in Chef Pat's spinning meat rack, and she was flung onto the rolling balls as well. They all crashed into Clyde after he got a face full of cat litter courtesy of Andrew, again cringy as hell, and Liam tripped and fell on top of his friends. Then this wacky sequence was capped off when Jenna and her cheerleading friends threw everyone up in the air and tossed them into the restricted sinkhole area. In other words, Lincoln and pals were victims of circumstance and therefore didn't deserve to be blamed for what happened. If anything, Lynn and the cheerleaders were responsible for the sinkhole reopening. It all started with Lynn and the hockey puck, and it ended with the cheerleaders throwing their classmates into the restricted sinkhole area. I mean, seriously, why would Jenna and her friends throw everyone into the one place no one was allowed to enter? Be that as it may, Clyde said what happened was collectively his and his friends' fault. Now look, I understood the lesson the writers were going for. No destruction would have happened had the kids tried to work out their differences during their first locker arrangement instead of wanting to be reassigned to different ones. I mean, they're not exactly wrong in that regard. However, in a more hypothetical and technical sense, everything leading up to the reopening of the sinkhole was unavoidable no matter what. They could have been assigned to those new lockers the first time, and the same crazy series of events that caused the sinkhole to reopen would have unfolded. Hypothetically, somebody other than them could have been in their place when Lynn fired off that hockey puck. Mind you, it wasn't just Lincoln and his friends who were affected by the sinkhole, because there were quite a few lockers that were taped off in the hallway. Chances are, other kids might have been on the receiving end of the cheerleaders tossing them into the air and into the restricted area, therefore triggering the same reaction. So yeah, I really didn't like how Clyde and everyone else in the group were blaming themselves for something they didn't even cause. Considering how it could have been anyone in their situation, having them feel guilty about what happened is very unwarranted. Nonetheless, Principal Ramirez wouldn't reassign them to new lockers, but luckily Meryl stepped in as their savior and allowed them to use her locker. Apparently she doesn't really need one because she keeps all her stuff in her hair, and we see her pulling multiple items out of that beehive several times throughout the episode. You have to wonder what else she's hiding in there, but that's a whole other topic. In the end, all 6 kids share a single locker, and while I do appreciate them learning to compromise, it's actually a little unsatisfying at the same time. Liam and Stella are still using their egg collector, and Zach is still using components of his security system. Those two things were already proven to have problems the first time, and I have reason to believe everyone would run into the same inconveniences a second time. Seriously, if you don't think that chicken is going to overload that locker with eggs, or if the security system is going to go on the offensive if someone other than Zach tries to open it, I have a broken school wall and window to show you. Overall, for this being one half of the season 6 finale, it's honestly not that good. Lincoln and pals went through 2 different locker arrangements and hated both of them for different but similar reasons. They all got caught up in some crazy domino effect and caused damage even though they weren't the ones who started it. Again, it was Lynn and the cheerleaders who were responsible for the sinkhole reopening, and Lincoln and pals were the victims of something that wasn't their fault. Unfortunately, the principal blamed them for the damage, and the kids truly believed they were to blame even though they weren't. While I do appreciate the lesson the writers were going for, it's how the story executes the lesson that doesn't make sense in terms of context. Still, despite the prospect of them having to possibly deal with some of the problems left over from their original locker arrangement, everyone gets a somewhat happy ending courtesy of Meryl. Other than that, everything else regarding their first 2 locker arrangements came off as either cringy, annoying, or just plain stupid. Not the best way to finish off the adventures of Lincoln and pals for season 6, but hey, you can't win them all. With that said, I give The Hurt Lockers a 5 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of The Hurt Lockers. I'll end this video on an interesting note. Rusty brushes his hair 500 times a day and Zach caused him to lose count. This is similar to Lenny's situation in the episode Space Invader when Lori caused her sister to lose count when she was trying to brush her hair a total of 50 times. It's kinda noteworthy how both characters each have a hair brushing goal with a number containing both a 5 and a 0, and how Rusty brushes his hair 450 more times than Lenny. You can interpret that last part however you want. But anyway, as far as the rest of this episode goes, what did you guys think of it? Love it? Hate it? Something you would add? Change? Keep it as it is? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to this channel for the latest Loud House content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.